astrological texts like Sarvarta Chintamani, Brihat Prashara, Horashastra, Yavana Jataka, Paladipika. I'm sure there are others that aren't just coming to my mind. But in all of these texts, one thing that you'll notice is that when you read them, if you've got copies of them, you'll see that the methodology is that what's described first typically are the planets and the qualities of the planets. And then we get into the signs. And then usually within the second, third, or somewhere in that very, very, very beginning of the book, then they talk about the Vargas. Then you'll see descriptions about here are how the Vargas are created. And this is important. This gives you some insights into the importance of the Vargas, because as I've been taught in Sanskrit literature, typically the way it works is the most important information is given at the beginning. And then everything after that is a description or an embellishment. That might not be the right word. It's a continuation of what has come before, the importance sections. And so what we find is the planets and the qualities of the planets are most important. Those principles are most important. Next, we get into the general qualities of the signs. And then after that, we have descriptions of how to create the Vargas. So that tells us that actually, before we even get into all of these techniques, before we even get into things like dignity, understanding what the Vargas are and how they're created is more important. Everything after that will elaborate on what the planets are doing, what the signs are up to, what the Vargas are all about. So what we need to be aware of is that the Vargas are fundamental, that they are just as important as the Rashi, and they are just as important as anything else when it comes to. Then you will also know how to read the Vargas. Seeing how the way you read the Vargas is really not much different than how you read the birth chart. So that's why having a beginner understanding of what the planets mean, how the techniques work, that's really all you need to get into the Vargas. Okay. The techniques might be applied slightly differently, but you need to know, what does Saturn do in a chart? What does Mars do in a chart? What does the second lord do? What does the fifth lord do? You need to know, what does it mean if a planet's in bad dignity? If you know these things, and you know what a Varga means, what it represents, then you just take that knowledge that you already have, and then you adjust it into the Varga in question. And again, this is going to be something that we go more deeply into as we go through each of the Vargas we're going to cover this weekend. What's an example of that? Well, if the sixth house represents enemies, obstacles, debts, things that kind of get in your way of achieving your goals and your successes, and that's in your birth chart, well, let's say that we're talking about the Navamsha. And we want to know, what are the things that are going to get in the way of your capacity to achieve your goals, either with your dharma, your purpose, or marriage, whatever it might be? What are those things that are going to get in the way? Well, what do? We go and we see, what's the sixth lord up to in the Navamsha? We go and we see what planets are in the sixth house. Those are going to be things where we're going to have obstacles, delays, and setbacks that we have to overcome. And if you see planets there, that's one thing. And you can say, all right, I see it, but what does that mean? Well, you return to your basic ideas, your basic principles of astrology to say, well, all right. So we see that we have Mars in the sixth house in the Navamsha. So it's something that might get in the way, that might be like an enemy to me of achieving my goals with my marriage or with my purpose and so on. Well, it's going to be Martian-related things. Maybe I've got, my ideals are too high. Maybe I'm a little too aggressive in that area of my life. Maybe I don't pick fights that are worth fighting for. Maybe I pick petty fights. So again, you see, if you know what the house means in general, if you know what a planet means in general, if you know what area of life the Varga relates to, then you can look at that Varga And you can get a very specific sense of where are the strengths in that area of life, where are the obstacles in that area of life. So you really have to have the basics of astrology fairly well committed to memory, because it's the Vargas that simply function as the container for the energetic drama of the planetary influences. So mastery of the basics goes a really long way to providing a deeper understanding to the Vargas. Now I'm going to go a little bit longer here with this introductory description before we take some questions. And do keep in mind that, with the chat box, if questions have already come up for you, go ahead and type them into the chat box, and I'll see them when we take a little break here. So let's keep on moving. All right. Now, the other thing we have to remember and understand is that since the Vargas are based on the specific degrees of a sign, every Varga is built on the specific degrees of any given sign, that the Vargas are not separate charts all by themselves. It's not like you've got the birth chart, and then out here floating in space, you have these 16 other charts with no real relationship to the birth chart, because the Vargas come from the birth chart. So they're not separate charts all unto themselves. And I like to look at them as though they are, in a sense, prismatic reflections. And maybe some of you have seen a prism before, where you've got that little glass thing and you shine light through it, a beam of light through it, and then it breaks that light down and it shines out in the color spectrum. So you've got one point of light, one stream of white light coming through, striking that prism, and that one point of light spreads out into all these other color wavelengths. So that one point of light is like the energy of a planet striking a particular degree in the Rashi chart. From that degree, that exact degree, the light of that planet or the energy of that planet branches out and strikes all these other Vargas to tell you, all right, well, this light is striking here in this sign, but it's reflecting out with its color spectrum, its prismatic spectrum, to these other areas of life in a different way. So I look at it like the points in a birth chart are the points where light strikes the prism of an individual's life. And if we have, for example, the sun at 24 degrees 51 of Libra. So let's just imagine we're looking at a chart and we see that the little symbol of the sun's there. We see little degrees underneath, say 2451, it's in Libra. Now, a lot of people are going to make some assessments about that. They're going to say, oh, well, Libra is in, or the sun is in Libra. So therefore we know, based on the qualities of the sun, that this person might pay a little too much attention to their advisors, the people around them, rather than following their own inspiration, because that's what the sun represents. We know the sun is debilitate in Libra. We might say to ourselves, this person might have a very subtle ego. That's positive spin on the sun in Libra. They might not really push their agendas too terribly hard, because again, they're more interested in success to the masses, the people around them, Libra energy, rather than attending to one's own personal goals or more egoic goals, often related to the sun. And we could say that just by saying the sun is in Libra. However, when the sun strikes that point, 2451 of Libra, the light of the sun hits that point, and then it prismatically refracts out into 15 other Vargas. And it's a continuous flow, which is like when you're looking at a prism, that light beam that comes in, it's not like it gets separated in the prism and then goes out into the color spectrum. That light beam is still connected to the light of that color spectrum. So it flows from the birth chart into these other areas of life. And so what might happen if we have the sun at 2451 of Libra? Well, believe it or not, it's going to fall in the Hora, or the D2 chart of Aries, where it's exalted. So this person is not going to have that same kind of energy when it comes to how they manage their resources, a Hora-related topic. In the D3, it's going to be in Gemini. Now, will the dignity be good or bad? Well, it will be falling in a natural neutral sign, so we might have to do a little more digging into that, but it's neutral at least, generally. In the Chaturtamsha, the D4, it's going to be falling in Cancer. That's how the fortunes that we get, the wealth above and beyond our needs. And we know that the moon is a friend to the sun. So in that chart, it's going to be doing better. In the Saptamsha, it's going to be falling in Pisces. Again, the sign of a friend. In the Navamsha, Taurus, the sign of an enemy. So we will be able to say that the sun, by being in the Navamsha of Taurus, it's still going to have some difficulty achieving its goals related to marriage and following its purpose in life, because that's what the D9 can relate to. The D10, it goes to Gemini. The D12, it goes to Cancer. The D16, it goes to Taurus. And the D20, it goes to Leo, its own home. So it's going to do very well in that Varga. D24, it could go into Pisces. D27 to Leo. D40, Capricorn. D45, Taurus. D60, Scorpio. So what we see is, once we know what each of these Vargas mean, then we know that just because a planet is debilitated in the Rashi chart doesn't mean it's going to be debilitated in every area of life. I mean, it may still have some problems, specifically in other areas of life, but this is a prime example. If we look at the Hora, the D2, for having the sun at 2451 of Libra, it's going to be exalted in Aries. So it's not going to act like a debilitated planet in that area of life. Okay? Now, this is also why again, you can't answer questions like, my sun is in Libra, so therefore what? Because it may be that in other areas of life that are extremely important to the individual, the sun is doing very well. And it may be that it is that area of life that the person puts a lot of attention towards. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's just say we're talking about this sun at 2451 of Libra in the D1. Okay, so we know that it's going to do some difficulty in regards to the person's path in life. Now, the D9, where the sun would fall in Taurus, which is going to be a natural enemy sign, maybe this person doesn't really have any interest in marriage. Maybe it's not something that they really care too much about. So, and maybe they've got a lot of focus on second house things. And what do I mean by that? It's like if we look at their birth chart and we see we have a lot of emphasis on success, to work and business and responsibilities, second house things. And we look at the ninth chart in their birth chart and we see maybe that planetary lord is debilitated. Maybe the lord has a low shad bala, or there's just not a lot of planets influencing that ninth. Well, that's not something that's really strong in their awareness anyway. So if you go to this person, you say, oh, well, your sun is in Libra, so therefore you have these difficulties with relationships, you can't really commit well and so on. And, you know, your sun's not very good in that regard. And they're going to say, that's, you know, that doesn't really make a whole lot of difference to me because my emphasis is on responsibilities, on wealth, on finances. That's what I'm interested in. And there are people like that. And so it's going to be more important that you see that the sun happens to be exalted in Aries in the D2 for this individual. So again, the Vargas are not separate from the birth chart. They give deeper insights into how the birth chart itself is going to play out. Now, before we move on to some other details about just what the Vargas are,